Something has changed in how they say your name, chosen one, and you felt it before you had a word for it. The one whole conversations quiet down for the moment you step out of earshot, that is you. The one whose reputation now travels ahead of them in a hush, like a warning nobody wants to be the first to explain out loud, like a folder somebody keeps reopening and closing again, because there is still no clean way to file what is inside it. There has been talk, plenty of it. Behind your back they have traded warnings like currency. Stay clear of that one. Keep your distance. That one sees too much. First it was laughter, easy and dismissive. Then the laughter thinned out into something closer to caution, passed quietly from person to person, the way people warn each other about weather they cannot control. You already know the shape of this ache, long before you had language for it. Passed over, written off. Called slow when you were actually careful, late when you were actually deliberate, fortunate when you were actually paying attention nobody else bothered to pay. They needed you smaller, so the room could feel appropriately sized around them. And now watch who has grown careful around you. Nothing loud announced it. It simply happened in rooms you never entered, in conversations that shifted the second your name surfaced, in the quiet decision to stop testing you directly and quietly reroute around you instead. None of that was something you imagined. That is a pattern with a cause. Proverbs 17 verse 28 names the cause plainly. Even fools are thought wise if they keep silent, and discerning if they hold their tongues. The world runs on quick sorting. People need a category to place you in before they can feel settled around you. Something predictable, something they can plan for. You kept declining to fit into any of the available boxes. That refusal, more than anything you ever said out loud, is what unsettled them. One question before we go further. Comment "I stayed quiet" if you already recognize every word of this. Subscribe if you are ready for what the rest of it explains. Because none of this was ever about being impressive to a room. It was about becoming someone whose peace could no longer be negotiated out of them. One when their doubt ran out of things to say. There was a season when people felt entitled to an explanation from you, why you made that choice, why the outcome refused to follow the script they had already written for it, why you were not rattled by what should have rattled you. You do not owe that accounting anymore. And the absence of it is exactly what left them without a script. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 27 states it plainly, "But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise." God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. The very people the world overlooked were the ones carrying weight nobody accounted for. That is not an accident of history. That is a pattern God keeps repeating on purpose, because human systems consistently misjudge where real strength is standing. Not the loudest voice in the room, not the most credentialed, not the one with the biggest reaction. God picked what everybody else already threw out. Every time. Notice what the verse does not say. It does not say God waited for the world's approval first. It says the opposite. God specifically chose what the world had already thrown out, as proof that human categories were never a reliable measure of anything that mattered. The reply you used to type out in full, rereading it twice before sending, is not something you feel compelled to write anymore. That single shift, saying less, explaining less, defending less, is not withdrawal. It is the version of you that finally stopped needing the last word to feel secure in what happened. It is fair to wonder whether staying calm while they expected a reaction cost you something, whether pushing back harder would have settled things faster. It would not have. Psalm 37 verse 5 to 6 makes a quieter promise than a counterattack ever could. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him and He will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Vindication that arrives on your own timetable rarely lasts. Vindication that arrives on God's timetable does not need defending, because by the time it shows up, the case has already closed itself. What they are experiencing now is not your absence of an answer. It is the discovery that you no longer need their permission to consider a matter closed. That discovery unsettles people who built their whole approach to you around one assumption: that pressure would eventually produce a reaction. It did not, and once pressure stops working, people do not escalate. They quietly set the tool down, because a tool that no longer works does not get sharpened. It gets abandoned. That is the first thing this season revealed. It did not turn you into someone harder to reach. It removed the lever they used to be able to pull, and it left them standing in a room where the old approach no longer opens anything. They tried louder. It did not work. They tried colder, tried warmer, tried patient, tried impatient. None of it worked. Every angle they tried was built for a version of you that stopped existing a while ago, and nobody sent them the memo. Silence that avoids and silence that no longer needs an audience are not the same thing. The first is fear wearing the shape of composure. The second is what actually happened to you. You are not avoiding the conversation. You have simply stopped needing it to end a certain way to feel at peace with how it ended. 2. Your silence was never empty, it was awake. People assume silence means absence, that if you are not speaking, you must not be paying attention, must not have an opinion, must be somewhere else entirely. That assumption has cost more than a few people an accurate read on exactly what they were dealing with. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 7 places silence plainly among the things appointed for their own time, a time to be silent and a time to speak. Silence in that verse is not a void. It is a deliberate posture, chosen the same way speech is chosen, for the moment it actually serves. Proverbs 10 verse 19 adds the warning most people never take seriously. Sin is not absent when words are many, but he who holds his tongue is wise. Talking is not the same thing as understanding. The person who says less is often the one who has been paying the closest attention the whole time. Ecclesiastes pairs silence and speech as equally valid tools, not as one correct option and one lesser one waiting to be fixed. A season has an appointed shape to it. Forcing speech into a season built for silence rarely produces anything worth what it costs. What people misread as disengagement was you noticing everything. The shift in tone right before someone changes the subject, the detail repeated twice because the first version did not even convince the person saying it. You did not miss any of it. You simply did not feel obligated to narrate what you noticed in real time. The question you used to feel required to answer out loud, the one meant to draw you into defending yourself, has slowly become something you can let sit unanswered without any discomfort at all. That shift alone changes how a room moves around you. Most conflict depends on both people supplying fuel. You stopped supplying yours. It is fair to wonder whether staying quiet in moments built to provoke you makes you look weaker, easier to dismiss, easier to talk over. It does the opposite. A quiet response to a provocation is far harder to argue with than an angry one, because there is nothing in it for the other person to grab onto. That is why your silence was never the empty thing they assumed it was. It was awake the entire time, noticing what the noise around them was too busy performing to see clearly. Here is the practical part worth carrying forward. The next time you feel pressure to fill a silence just because it feels uncomfortable, pause. Ask whose discomfort it actually is. More often than not, the urge to speak in that moment is not about clarity. It is about relieving a tension that was never yours to relieve. Let it sit. Silence held on purpose teaches you more about a room than almost anything said inside it. They talk to fill space. You let the space stay empty until it says something. They mistake noise for control. You already know noise is what people reach for when they have lost it. Watch what happens in a group when the talking finally stops. Somebody always rushes to fill it. It is rarely the person with the most to say. It is usually the person most uncomfortable with what silence might reveal, if it is allowed to sit there long enough. 3. Clarity is uncomfortable to anyone standing on illusion. Something happens to a room when one person in it stops pretending not to notice what everyone else is quietly working around. It does not require confrontation, it only requires accuracy. And accuracy is far more disruptive than most people expect. John 3 verse 20 puts it directly, "Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed." Light in that verse is not aggressive. It does not attack anything. It simply makes what was hidden visible, and that alone is enough to make people flee it. You did not need to expose anyone. You only needed to see clearly. Clarity did the rest on its own. Not a confrontation, not a speech, not a single accusation, just a light switched on in a room built to stay dim. That is all it took. Picture a room lit only by candles for years, everyone comfortable with the dim edges, until a single window is finally uncovered and ordinary daylight pours in. Nobody moved the furniture, nobody rearranged anything. The light simply revealed dust that was always there. The people most invested in the dim version of the room are the ones most unsettled by the change. A hush falls over a group. Once someone stops playing along with an agreed-upon fiction, nobody names what happened. Everyone just feels the temperature drop. And most people in that room will spend more energy managing the discomfort of being seen than they ever spent maintaining the fiction in the first place. You are not responsible for how uncomfortable your clarity makes people who built their whole footing on things staying vague. That discomfort belongs to them. Softening your own accuracy to spare them from it would only hand back the very thing your clarity took from them. What they call arrogance is usually just precision they were not prepared to sit with. What they call attitude is usually just a refusal to pretend confusion you do not actually feel. Neither of those needs an apology. An important distinction is worth holding on to here, though. Clarity that serves people tells the truth gently and waits for it to be received. Clarity that serves your own ego wants credit for noticing first. The goal was never to be the person who sees the most. It was to see accurately enough to walk faithfully, whether or not anyone acknowledges what you saw. They called it an attitude problem. It was never that. Attitude wants an audience. What you have does not need one. You did not turn the light on to make anyone uncomfortable. You turned it on because pretending not to see something you clearly saw was never an option you were willing to keep living inside. Some rooms need the dim lighting to function. Take the light away and the whole arrangement stops making sense. That is not your problem to fix. It was never your job to keep a fiction running smoothly for people who built their comfort on top of it. They will call it harsh. It is not harsh. Harsh is designed to hurt. This was just accurate, and accuracy only feels harsh to whatever it exposes. You are not chasing a reaction. You never were. Accuracy was always the whole point, and reactions were simply something that happened to be standing nearby when it landed. 4. You stopped needing the room's permission. A room's approval used to be something you needed before you felt settled in it. The right nod, the right laugh at the right moment, some small signal that you belonged. That need quietly ended. Everyone around you can feel its absence, even if they cannot name what changed. Galatians 1 verse 10 asks the exact question worth sitting with. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Approval-seeking and genuine service cannot occupy the same space for long. Eventually, one gives way to the other. The moment it does, everything about how you carry yourself in a room changes. Not a room full of applause, not a title, not a seat at the front, just a quiet yes from God, and that has become enough. He was not writing as someone who had never cared what people thought. He was writing as someone who had built an entire ministry, then watched how fast it would have collapsed under the weight of keeping every critic satisfied. The compliment you used to wait for before deciding your work was actually good is no longer something you need at all. You already know when something is finished well. That knowledge does not require an outside voice to confirm it before you can rest in it. It is fair to wonder whether this independence reads as coldness, as someone who no longer cares what anyone thinks. It does not have to. There is a real difference between not needing approval and not caring about people, and the two get confused constantly by people who never separated their worth from an audience's reaction. Hierarchy-built rooms are not unsettled by defiance. They are unsettled by indifference to the currency the room runs on. You are not trying to outrank anyone. You simply stopped needing the rank to feel secure. A system built on people needing its approval has no lever left to pull on someone who no longer needs it. This is not the same thing as no longer caring how your actions affect people. Love still matters. Kindness still matters. What changed is the source you draw your worth from before you walk into the room, not whether you treat the people inside it well once you get there. They keep waiting for you to ask how you did. You stopped asking a while ago. That silence confuses them more than any answer could. Approval has to be re-earned constantly. Conviction only has to be settled once. That is the whole difference. And it is why one of them is exhausting and the other one is not. They still perform for rooms that forgot them by morning. You stopped performing once you noticed the applause never actually followed you home. Paul had every reason to keep chasing approval. Instead, he named the trade plainly and let it cost him whatever it cost him. That same trade is available to you, whether or not the room around you is ready to watch you make it. It costs something real. Every trade worth making does. What it buys back is a version of you that no longer flinches waiting for a verdict that was never theirs to give in the first place. 5. Why they study you now instead of testing you. Small tests filled an entire season once. Subtle provocations. Comments designed to see how far they could push before you cracked. That season is over. Not because they gave up trying, but because they ran out of angles that produced a reaction worth studying. Running out of angles is its own quiet kind of defeat for people who built their whole approach around finding one. David watched this exact shift happen around him long before he ever wore a crown. Psalm 37 verse 12 to 13 describes precisely what was happening behind the scenes. The wicked plot against the righteous and gnash their teeth at them, but the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he knows their day is coming. Notice what the plotting actually produces: nothing. The scheming continues, the teeth keep gnashing, and none of it changes an outcome that was already settled. They plot in one room, God laughs in another. That is not cruelty, that is the confidence of someone who already knows how it ends. Psalm 37 also carries an emotional posture worth sitting with on God's side of the equation. Not anxiety, not scrambling to intervene. Laughter, the kind that comes from already knowing how the story ends. That same posture is available to you in seasons where scheming is happening around you that you cannot fully see. You can feel your own pulse stay even in a conversation where someone else's voice starts to rise, their pace quickening, while yours stays exactly where it was. That evenness is not something you perform. It is simply what happens when you are no longer managing an internal reaction, while also managing the conversation. They are not studying you because they admire you. They are studying you because testing stopped working. Observation is the only strategy left. That shift from provoking to watching is itself information. The approach has been retired, even if nobody says so directly. Something worth understanding sits underneath why observation replaces confrontation once testing fails. Confrontation requires the confronter to believe they might still win. Observation is what remains once that belief quietly disappears. People do not study what they still think they can beat. They study what they have started to suspect they cannot. None of this requires you to track their behavior in return. The moment you start monitoring how closely they are monitoring you, you have quietly stepped back into the same game you already outgrew. Let them study. You have somewhere else to be. They used to test you weekly, now they just watch. That downgrade is the whole story. That suspicion changes everything without a single word needing to be said about it out loud. It shows up in shorter conversations. Fewer jokes at your expense. A carefulness that was never there before, because carefulness is what people bring into a room once they suspect they no longer have the upper hand in it. You are not doing anything different to cause it. You are simply not doing the thing that used to make the old approach work. That absence alone is loud enough. Let them keep watching. Watching costs them something too. Every hour spent studying you is an hour not spent building whatever they actually claim to want. That trade never worked out in their favor, and it is still not working out in their favor now. 6. Walking away was louder than any argument. A table once existed that you assumed you wanted a seat at, a room whose approval felt like the whole point of showing up. Then you looked closely enough to see what the table was actually built on, and the wanting quietly disappeared. Nehemiah faced enemies who tried again and again to lure him away from the work God had given him, using every excuse except the honest one. Nehemiah 6 verse 3 records his answer without apology. I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it to go down to you? He did not argue with them. He did not explain himself repeatedly. He simply refused to come down, and the refusal itself ended the negotiation. Jesus gives his own disciples nearly identical instructions for rooms that will not receive them. Matthew 10 verse 14 urges the same response. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet. Walking away is not failure to engage. In both accounts, it is the actual strategy, sanctioned rather than apologized for. Nehemiah's enemies changed their approach 4 separate times before he finally recognized the pattern for what it was. He did not need to analyze every single invitation individually once he understood the underlying strategy. He gave the same answer every time, because the answer was never about the specific invitation. It was about protecting the work. Proverbs 22 verse 24 to 25 says it plainly. Do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared. Some tables are not neutral. Staying seated at one long enough eventually shapes you into someone who belongs there, and that is a far higher price than whatever status the seat seemed to offer. Refusing that chair at that table said more than any argument you could have made sitting in it. Nobody had to watch you refuse loudly. They only had to notice you were simply no longer there, building something else entirely on different terms with no performance required to stay welcome in it. Some might wonder whether walking away instead of fighting for your place made you look like you gave up. It did not. Giving up implies you wanted what you left. What actually happened is you saw clearly enough to recognize the table was never worth the cost of staying seated at it. Clarity is not the same thing as surrender. Build a practical marker for the next time you are unsure whether a room is worth staying in. Ask whether staying would slowly require you to become someone you would not currently recognize. If the honest answer is yes, the door is already answered, whatever the invitation looks like on the surface. Walking away rarely feels dramatic in the moment. It feels quiet, almost anticlimactic, which is exactly why people underestimate how much it actually costs the room being left. A seat that goes empty on purpose says more than a seat filled with resentment ever could. They expected you to fight for that seat. You did not fight for it. You just never came back for it, and the not coming back was the whole answer. 7. They built a cage because they couldn't build a case. When people cannot make you smaller through argument, they often try to make the room smaller instead. Relabeling depth as difficulty. Changing what gets rewarded. Until the environment itself becomes the obstacle, nobody has to admit they built on purpose. Saul could not defeat David in open contest, so he changed strategy entirely. 1 Samuel 18 verse 9 captures the shift plainly, and from that time on Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Notice what happened next. Saul did not confront David directly again. He restructured David's assignments, kept him at a careful distance, built an entire atmosphere of suspicion without ever winning a single honest argument against him. Not a battle, not a debate. Just distance, dressed up as policy. That is what losing looks like when nobody wants to admit they lost. Daniel faced something even more precise. His accusers searched for any flaw in his conduct and found none, so Daniel 6 verse 4-5 carries their conclusion. They could find no corruption in him. So the administrators and the satraps went to the king and said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God." When they could not build a case against his character, they built a law to trap him anyway. That is precisely what containment looks like when confrontation fails. Nobody has to admit the room shrank on purpose. They only need everyone inside it to stop noticing it used to be bigger. Neither Saul nor Daniel's accusers ever produced an honest reason for what they did next. No corruption to point to, no case to build. The absence of a legitimate reason did not stop the containment. It only meant the containment had to be built on something other than truth, which tells you everything about how much it was actually worth. Shrinking to fit that kind of room was already tried once. Softening what you actually saw, playing smaller than what you actually knew, telling yourself it was maturity rather than what it actually was. It nearly cost you the very thing that made you valuable in the first place. The moment you stopped bending was the moment the room stopped being able to hold you at all. David did not respond to Saul's suspicion by shrinking further, and he did not respond by confronting him either. He kept serving faithfully, kept playing the harp in the very palace where the jealousy lived. Let time itself expose what accusation never could. Patience here is not passivity, though. David kept building his skill, kept leading his men well, kept becoming more of who he already was, while the room around him tried to make that growth invisible. They shrank the room. You kept growing anyway. Eventually the math stopped working in their favor. They needed the room smaller because they could not make you smaller. That distinction matters more than it looks. One is a strategy against a person. The other is an admission that the strategy already failed. Call it whatever they want to call it, policy, structure, culture fit. Underneath every label is the same simple fact. They ran out of honest ways to keep you down, so they built a dishonest one instead. 8. Every attack became something you carry now. Nobody explains this part in advance. That the very pressure meant to break you is often the exact thing that ends up strengthening you, provided you survive it without becoming bitter in the process. 1 Peter 5 verse 10 promises something sturdier than relief. And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. Restoration in that verse is not a return to who you were before the pressure. It is an upgrade, produced specifically through the suffering rather than despite it. Not the same, better. That is what restoration actually means here, and most people never expect that part. Isaiah 54 verse 17 declares it outright. No weapon forged against you will prevail. Not because the weapons were never real, because none of them landed the way they were intended to. Romans 5 verse 3-4 explains exactly how pressure becomes character. We also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. Nothing in that sequence skips a step. Suffering does not produce hope directly. It produces perseverance first, and perseverance has to be lived long enough to produce character. And only then does character produce hope. Skip the middle steps, and you get something shallow. What you are carrying now was built the slow way, which is exactly why it holds weight the fast way never could. An old rejection letter, a dismissive email, a conversation that ended with a door closing. You kept traces of some of it. Not out of grief, as proof of exactly how far you have come since. Every attempt to exclude you taught you how to build without needing an invitation. Every dismissive comment sharpened your read on exactly which rooms were worth entering in the first place. None of that was wasted, and none of it happened to you without also happening for you. They meant it as rejection. It landed as training. They still do not know the difference. One honest risk deserves naming here. Carrying proof of what you survived can slide quietly into carrying resentment instead, if you are not careful which one you are actually holding. Proof strengthens you. Resentment slowly poisons the very steadiness this season was building. Check which one you are actually carrying. Set down whichever one is no longer serving you. Not comfortable, not quick, not the story anyone would choose in advance. But real and still standing, which is more than most of what tried to break it can say, and more than most of what tried to break it ever expected. Nobody sends flowers for the season that built you. Nobody throws a party for the years spent absorbing what should have broken you. That recognition rarely comes from outside. It has to come from you, naming what actually happened underneath the pressure, out loud, on purpose, so the season gets to count for something instead of just getting survived and forgotten. They watched you go through it and called it misfortune. You went through it and called it material. Only one of those two readings actually leaves you with something to build on afterward, and it was never the one they were offering. 9. This was never luck, it was preparation. People will tell themselves any story that keeps the outcome comfortable, that you were fortunate, that you knew the right person, that circumstances simply lined up. That story protects them from a harder truth. What happened to you was not chance. It was the direct result of paying attention while everyone else was distracted. Ephesians 2 verse 10 settles it as fact, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Prepared in advance, not improvised after the fact, not assembled from whatever was lying around once the moment arrived. The good work fitted to you was decided before you had the awareness to notice it happening, which means nothing about where you have ended up is an accident anyone can take credit for taking away from you. Not luck, not timing, not the right people in the right room. Design decided before you ever showed up to live it out. Consider the phrase God's handiwork for a moment. It describes something crafted deliberately, with attention to detail, not something that assembled itself by chance. Whatever you are carrying now, the steadiness, the clarity, the refusal to be provoked, was not a personality trait you happened to be born with. It was built the same deliberate way anything worth trusting gets built. Here is the specific, practical shift worth carrying forward. The next time you feel the old pull to explain yourself to someone who has already decided not to understand you, pause before you speak. Ask whether the explanation is actually for clarity or simply for relief from the discomfort of being misread. Clarity is worth offering. Relief-seeking explanations rarely change anything except how tired you feel afterward. Build a second practice alongside the first. At the end of a season that felt difficult, take a moment to name specifically what it produced in you, not just what it cost you. Naming the cost without naming the produce leaves you with only the wound and none of the growth. Write it down if it helps. Say it out loud if that works better. Do not let a hard season pass through you without extracting what it was actually building. They will keep calling it luck. Let them. You know better, and knowing better is enough. That story also conveniently removes any responsibility from them to examine why they missed what you did not. If your outcome was luck, nothing about their own approach needs reconsidering. If your outcome was attention and discipline, the gap between you and them was never about circumstance at all. and that is a far less comfortable thing to sit with. Every season that felt like delay was doing something underneath the surface that impatience never could have done. That is not a comforting story to hear in the middle of it. It is simply what actually happened, whether or not anyone around you is ready to admit it. None of this arrived by accident, and none of it will be undone by accusation either. Say it plainly to yourself, even if nobody else ever says it to you. This was not luck. This was not chance. This was preparation, running underneath the surface long before you had a name for what it was doing. Carry this forward as settled, not as something you still need to prove. What you have walked through was not an isolated event. It is the ongoing shape of a life built on paying attention instead of performing, and that shape does not reverse itself the moment this message ends or the moment the next test begins. Not a performance, not a phase. A shape formed slowly that holds regardless of who is in the room to notice it. 2 Timothy 1 verse 7 affirms it directly. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. Notice what is missing from that list. Cunning is not there. Domination is not there. What replaces fear is power held steady by love and discipline, an entirely different foundation than the untouchable reputation the world tends to admire. James 3 verse 17 names it precisely, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. That is not the wisdom that wins arguments or unsettles rooms for its own sake. It is wisdom that produces mercy, and mercy is the part most easily lost when a person discovers how capable they actually are of outlasting everyone who doubted them. Walk forward from here without needing the story witnessed by the very people who once misjudged it. Let your calm keep doing what it has already been doing. Let your clarity stay aimed at truth rather than at winning, and when the next season of testing arrives, because it will, meet it the same way you met this one. Not with an argument you need someone else to lose. With a peace nobody in the room can take credit for giving you, and nobody in the room can take away from you either. Not because the tests will stop. They will not. Because you already know how this particular story ends, and knowing that changes how you carry every chapter still ahead of it. Before we bring this to God together, sit for a second with whatever this stirred in you. Recognition, relief, or the quiet ache of finally being understood. Let's not just carry that feeling silently. Let's hand it to the one who built it into you long before anyone noticed. Heavenly Father, we thank you first, because every season we spent misunderstood was never a season you were absent from. We praise you for being a God who values quiet faithfulness over loud performance, who sees what a room full of people overlooked, and who has never once needed applause to confirm what you were doing in us. Thank you for the patience it took to shape this kind of steadiness in us, patience we rarely noticed while it was happening. We bring before you everyone who has just recognized themselves in this message, and everyone still in a season where the testing has not let up yet. For the ones who feel like they have finally reached solid ground, we ask for humility to match it, so that this kind of steadiness never curdles into contempt for the very people still learning to find theirs. Teach us to hold this clarity the way Daniel held his integrity, quietly, consistently, without needing anyone to notice it to make it real. For the ones still being tested, still watching pressure they cannot yet explain, we ask for endurance that does not turn to bitterness. Remind us that Nehemiah kept building while he was mocked, that David stayed faithful while Saul watched him with suspicion, that every one of your servants who walked through pressure like this came out the other side more like you, not less. Soften whatever has hardened in us toward the people who tested us, doubted us, or tried to shrink us to fit their own comfort. Give us grace to see them clearly without needing to see them punished, because our peace was never meant to become a weapon we use against the very people who lacked it. Let every trial you allow us to walk through build wisdom in us rather than pride, and let every quiet victory draw us closer to your mercy rather than further from the people who still need it. Lord, guard us from mistaking this kind of steadiness for superiority. It is not proof that we are better than anyone. It is proof that you have been faithful to finish what you started in us, and we do not want to hold that proof with anything other than gratitude. Keep us tender toward the people still finding their footing, so that what we carry now becomes an encouragement to them rather than one more reason for them to feel behind. We thank you that our security was never meant to come from a room's approval, and we thank you that whatever pressure remains ahead of us is already within what you have prepared us for. Help us walk forward steady, humble, and grateful, and strengthen tonight anyone still in the middle of being tested, reminding them gently that the outcome is not in question, only the timing. We ask all of this in the name of Jesus, who stayed silent before accusers, who had already decided not to understand him, and who was vindicated not by argument, but by God's timing alone. Amen. If this named something you have been carrying quietly, pass it to someone still in the middle of their own testing season. A like, a comment, or a share puts this in front of someone who needs it today. Subscribe if you want to keep walking through seasons like this with steadiness instead of noise. And may whatever pressure remains ahead of you only prove, once again, what God has already finished building in you.